Oi, you got a license for that wank love? That's the Airstrip 1, formerly known as the United Kingdom, in the year 2019 Anno Domini. A license for jerking off. Christ almighty. That place is such a meme. Anyway, also in Airstrip 1, you can be kicked out of an establishment and may even be indeed a crime to publicly quote the dictionary definition of the word woman. In other news, Reason magazine, and Robbie Swove in particular, continues to be LOLbertarian and proving why mainstream libertarianism will continue to be marginal nonsense for many decades to come. Oh, and in France, they're trying to apply anti-racism laws against a Negroid who preaches racial violence against white people. Now, wouldn't it be better if they just abolish the anti-racism laws altogether? Well, if they did that, then we wouldn't be having a periodic insanity series, wouldn't we? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the 27th installment of Periodic Insanity. Alright, so let's carry on from where we left it off in the previous episode. This would be the third in a row and likely not the last in this marathon, because this year is showing itself to be really wild. Just a month into 2019 and enough material for 4 or 5 Periodic Insanity videos. Anyway, the first is a follow-up from a story we've been covering on this channel almost every step of the way in the last 2 years, and it's the story of Oi, you got a license for that wank love. Days Digital, you're going to need an ID to watch porn in the United Kingdom from this spring. In simpler terms, one of the worst ID mishaps would be getting to a club and realizing you've forgotten it at home. Well, now if you get that urge in the night time to look at porn, you better have a government-issued ID ready or your credit card information. Even if you're looking for free XXX content, you'll have to provide relevant identification that you're over the age of 18. Under new restrictions, any page displaying adult content will have a warning page that requires users to log in. If you don't want to use your card or ID, you can purchase a special porn pass instead. According to the register, IDs will have to be scanned in the plan deemed fit for purpose by a government body. The ruling was based on the predicted costs for rolling out the new laws, so literally a wanking license. The regulator will be empowered to direct internet service providers to block access to sites which fail to comply with appropriate age verification requirement, and those which host extreme material, the report reads. The regulator will also be able to direct ISPs to block access to sites containing extreme pornography, regardless of whether age verification controls are in place. Making changes to the British Board of Film Classification to install the age verification software is estimated to cost around £4.5 million, and the report did state that the government's plans do not assess the cost of pornography, the costs to pornography providers resulting from the proposal. These plans seem to be a hangover from David Cameron's days as Prime Minister. Yeah, the guy who allegedly had sex with a dead pig's mouth at uni. Back in 2015, when the ex-Tory leader proposed stricter laws against porn, it was the EU who had our backs and defended the user's right to consent to viewing adult content. Of course, we've made the incredibly dumb decision to leave the EU, so now we have to defend ourselves. About 60,000 shops in the UK will offer age verification cards, which should be on offer before April. That gives us only a few months of free and unregulated smutty internet. It seriously looks like nobody is going to stop this. Close quote. First of all, let us note that the reported cost just doubled. If you recall, about 1.5 years ago, I was reading from Wired magazine that the British government said that the cost will be about £2 million, a piece of information which at the time triggered a lot of laughter on my behalf. Now, they say it will cost about £4.5 million, which is still laughable if not outright naive. Anyone believing that number must be seriously misinformed about how these things works. For £4.5 million, you will at best get a "you're kinda naughty, aren't ya" type of pop-up. No, seriously. £4.5 million for a full range of ID verifications? You gotta be fucking kidding me. Just the rolling out of those wanking licenses, because that's exactly what they should be called, will cost more than £4 million. But perhaps the most worrisome part, in addition to nobody trying to stop this, is the part where the government gets to decide what counts as extreme pornography and then have, in theory, the power to ban it altogether, even if that material is perfectly legal and the customer is a grown adult. That, my fellow deplorables, is what a nanny state looks like. You can't even rub one off without asking for permission from the state, and once permission is granted, the state still gets to decide what you're wanking on. All for your own protection, of course. Now, we shouldn't be terribly surprised that there isn't much public pushback to this. Brits tend to be amazingly puritanical in public, even though once the cameras stop rolling, they're some of the most easygoing folks I've had the chance to meet in the over 80 countries that I have visited so far. But because of the still existent tendency to maintain some puritanism in public, nobody really wants to be that guy or that gal who defends free porn. Add to that the loicense culture that's been formed in the last 70 years in the United Kingdom, a complete reversal to what used to make the United Kingdom a great place, and one is suddenly out of luck. I mean, sure, for me, the argument that we're not taking away porn, we're just making it regulated and safe is a complete and utter insanity. But in Britain, such retardation holds a lot of sway with way too many people who've been what's the word am I looking for? Conditioned. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Conditioned. Conditioned into thinking that it's okay for the state to regulate all aspects of human living and to never question whether it is appropriate for the state to have such powers, or indeed whether the state is trustworthy on some of these things. Because with this policy, the state quite literally says that it knows better on what kind of consenting material with consenting adults you should be wanking on and what kind of material is bad for you and thus no wanking for you. I mean, do you realize just how insane that sounds? I mean, for crying out loud. Bring back the Catholic dictatorship as far as I'm concerned. Clearly, this Anglican experiment failed because the Catholic Church, at the peak of its abusive power, at the peak of its authoritarian behavior, was less insane than the supposedly free Britain of today. Ultimately, this policy will not save anyone and will not prevent any minor who wants to watch porn from doing so. Web browsers now have native VPN support, so users, regardless of age, will be literally one click away from going around this policy and thus render the whole thing useless. The taxpayers and the customers of the internet service providers will be left to foot the bill for a completely useless infrastructure. Since the United Kingdom is already an Orwellian nanny state, there isn't even an excuse that the state will collect some data. The GCHQ already has all the data, so this is quite literally entirely useless. One negative result will be, though, the increase in the number of parents who, upon hearing about this policy, will likely supervise their children's online activity even less, thinking, as always mistakenly, that the state is there to help. And this is the underlying issue with all of these policies allegedly meant to protect children from any kind of vice. They get more support today than 50 years ago because way too many parents seriously think that supervising their children is too hard and would rather offload that problem onto someone else, be they the internet service providers or the state or the school. Now, that in itself wouldn't be such a tragedy if those really bad ideas hadn't been impacting the rest of the population negatively. In this case, the idea that the government can track down the entire internet and censor accordingly is absolute lunacy. As a result, a lot of completely legitimate non-porn content will end up being censored by the always imperfect algorithms, and then those affected will be left to battle with the BBFC or perhaps with each internet service provider. Well, that or just simply stop caring about the British market. And I haven't even talked about the implementation itself yet. For instance, most of the age verification will still be left for the industry. So this means that companies that can't afford the system will be outright banned. Who can afford the system? The biggest in the industry, of course, which is why one of the age verification tools deemed highly trustworthy by the United Kingdom government is Age ID, a system owned by a company called MindGeek, which is the parent company of YouPorn, Pornhub, and RedTube. Translation: the government is sharing the database of porn habits with connection to real-life identity with the biggest porn distribution corporation. The amount of insanity in this piece of news could eat up the whole freaking episode. And then there's the credit card issue. As credit card processors have shown themselves to be pretty fucking censorious lately, it's hardly a good idea to share the information on who watches porn with the credit card companies, who are otherwise notorious for censoring people for liking guns or for having politically incorrect opinions or for engaging in the sex industry. The credit card companies' censorship of the sex industry is quite old, as a matter of fact. Just look it up. The sex workers always have a problem with these people. The privacy clusterfuck that this creates is quite astonishing. Well done, Britain. Well done. Bloody morons. Alright, let's move on because, as I said, this is the kind of news that could by itself eat up a whole episode, and we have a lot of other insanity in the queue. Okay, let's stay in the United Kingdom and on the topic of sex, but going full political. Mom barred from pub for wearing t-shirt in case it upsets transgender people, titles The Mirror. A mom has been barred from her local pub after a complaint that her t-shirt discriminated against transgender people. Rebecca Washbale wore a simple black top which reads the dictionary definition of woman as a human female. But a member of staff at the Five Clouds Tap and Bottle in Macclesfield, Cheshire, told her that the t-shirt offended other customers. And as a result, the barwoman informed her she was banned because of the clothing item, which was considered as transphobic and not inclusive. Miss Washbale told the Mail on Sunday what she meant was that I was somehow offending men who say they are women because my t-shirt did not include them in the definition of a woman. There aren't even any transgender staff or patrons at the club. It's crackers. The 34-year-old backs the feminist group Fair Play for Women, which opposed the government consultation to reform the Gender Recognition Act. This would let people self-identify as the gender they believe they are without the need for a medical diagnosis. But transgender campaigners and feminists have been in battle as there are fears that the reform will harm the safety and privacy of women. Last week, the mom of one went to the pub where she had been a regular for 3 years with her girlfriend. However, she was shocked that the barwoman spoke to her regarding the complaint against her t-shirt. Miss Washbale claims that nothing unusual happened during her visit until she spoke to a fellow customer, a gay man called Micah Johnson. She sat next to him and asked how he was, but he made it clear that he did not wish to speak to him. Around half an hour later, the member of staff spoke to Miss Weshbale, I keep on fucking up her name, and told her she could not stay at the pub as she had been upsetting other customers and Mr. Johnson was crying. She told the Mail on Sunday she mumbled a bit about my t-shirt being transphobic and that I had been transphobic previously. So she then said I was barred, then that she had been nominated by other bar staff to come to tell me that. I just love how this article is phrased. It's impeccable propaganda. Well, it's not really impeccable, but it's almost exactly how I would have written it. I probably would have put an even more innocuous headline like "Mom barred from pub for wearing a dictionary quote." Still true, but propagandistically more effective. The insanity aspect here is, of course, the idea that a t-shirt with the definition of the word woman is not only offensive, which it isn't, but it's so offensive that it warrants people being kicked out from pubs, even if 0 individuals from the group allegedly offended is present to even see the offense and make up their minds on it. That, my friends, is insane, like full insanity. But it's in the name. It's in the same vein that is the societal standard now in many places in Britain, namely that speech must be regulated and curated. Heck, it's the country where the police can visit you for retweeting wrong thing about trannies. So this particular feminist can thank her lucky stars that the snowflakes didn't call the police as well. Other than that, I will repeat what I said 2 years ago. In this little battle, which is an intra-left and intra-misandrist battle, political operatives of the non-left should either avoid intervening and just let them eat each other, or intervene on the side of the so-called TERFs. I mean, both sides are atrocious, but at least these so-called trans-exclusionary radical feminists understand basic biology, which by feminist standards, that's huge progress, since traditionally feminists have been incapable of understanding anything even remotely approaching science. Alright, speaking of science, DNA pioneer James Watson stripped of honors after reckless race remarks, titles Sky News. Nobel-prize winning DNA scientist James Watson has been stripped of several honorary titles by the laboratory he once headed over his views about intelligence and race. The Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory said it was acting in response to remarks he made in a television documentary which aired earlier this month. The 90-year-old geneticist, one of 3 who discovered the DNA double helix, had lost his job at the New York laboratory in 2007 for expressing racist views. But in the new PBS film American Masters, Decoding Watson, he said his views on intelligence and race had not changed since. He had told the magazine in 2007 he was inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa, as all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, where all the testing says not really. While Dr. Watson also said he hoped everyone was equal, he added people who have to deal with black employees find this is not true. In the latest documentary, the molecular biologist says that genes cause a difference on average between black people and white people in IQ tests. The laboratory branded the latest remarks reprehensible, reckless, and unsupported by science, saying they effectively reversed Dr. Watson's written apology and retraction in 2007. The research center subsequently revoked 3 titles: Chancellor Emeritus, Oliver R. Grace Professor Emeritus, and Honorary Trustee. Dr. Watson's son, Rufus, has since said his father was in a nursing home after a car crash in October. He said the scientist's awareness of his surroundings were very minimal and rejected the notion that he was a bigot. He said, "My dad's statements might make him out to be a bigot and discriminatory, but they just represent his rather narrow interpretation of genetic destiny. My dad had made the lab his life, and yet now the lab considers him a liability." Dr. Watson rose to prominence after sharing a Nobel Prize with scientists Francis Crick and Maurice Wilkins for discovering DNA was a double helix in the shape of a long, twisting ladder. The finding presented a breakthrough in understanding how genetical material worked, close quote. Well, who cares? He disagreed with the egalitarian dogma, so off with his head. Now look, I understand, I really do understand, why it's difficult for way too many people to accept that there are, at least in part, genetic reasons for difference in IQ amongst groups of people. And it's not just white versus black. The average IQ in Belarus is almost 3 points lower than the average IQ in Finland, even though genetically the difference between the two peoples is pretty low. The average IQ in North Korea must be at least 5 points lower than the average IQ in South Korea, and they are the same people. The average IQ in Kenya is about 4 points lower than the average IQ in Eritrea, and they both qualify as black in the eyes of the ever more censorious academic left. The point I'm trying to make here is that looking at these things honestly does not make one a bigot or a white supremacist or whatever. Besides, these are group categories. They don't say much about individuals. For instance, the country with the highest IQ is Hong Kong, yet there are more Nobel Prize laureates in science from India than from Hong Kong. India, whose country-wide average IQ is pretty low, gave 2 laureates in physics, while Hong Kong so far gave only 1. The idea of devising policy based on average group IQ is pure insanity, but you know what else is at least equally insane? Banning any discussion on the topic, that's what. And I'm sorry, but 90-year-old James Watson has kinda earned the right to opine on these things, even if you are offended by his opinions and even if you think he's wrong. This makes it even worse when we learn that the guy is kinda senile anyway, which is not really a surprise. I mean, he is 90 years old after all. So you're basically gonna punish a frail old man by stripping him of his honors earned after 70 years of hard work, a man who poses no threat to anyone for an opinion expressed while in a dubious mental state in a nursing home. That is insane. I don't care what you believe about race and IQ. Heck, I don't even care where you stand on any politically controversial issue. The idea of punishing a man who contributed so much to science for an opinion expressed at the age of 90 is complete bollocks and should be unacceptable to any normal being. I mean, what's next? Banning certain life-saving medicine or vaccines because those who made them had politically incorrect views? I mean, you do realize that geeky scientists tend to score pretty low on social skills, and many of them do have pretty harsh views on certain things. But so what? Why should we care that much what is the opinion of a scientist over a political topic? It's madness. And that goes for the left too, who loves to quote Stephen Hawking on economics, as if Hawking's economical illiteracy and suddenly becomes tolerable because he was an outstanding physicist. No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't invalidate Hawking's work in theoretical physics. The equivalent here would be for a right-wing leadership to posthumously remove some of Hawking's honors because he aired rather bigoted, unsavory, and downright illiterate views on economics, social issues, and geopolitics. And this could, in theory, be done. Hawking got the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2009. Donald Trump could simply withdraw that distinction, citing concerns over Hawking's anti-Semitism. You see? Everyone can play that game, and the academic left will make these kinds of things more likely instead of less likely to happen. Alright, let's go to another clusterfuck, namely the Gillette ad controversy. You didn't really think I would ignore that, did you? Anyway, to combine more insanity into one segment, let us read what was, in my opinion, the worst of the worst coverage of the controversy given, of course, by the LOLbertarian rag Reason magazine through the keyboard of its most far left writer, who for some reason still successfully pretends to be a libertarian. The Gillette ad tells men not to hurt people. Why is this offensive? Writes Robbie Sove, dripping of soy, an individual whose face should be in the dictionary as explanation for the phrasing disdainful cuck. So let's deconstruct this. Gillette, the shaving company, debuted a new commercial this week that assails toxic masculinity and challenges men to behave better toward women and each other. But since modern cultural discourse involves two constantly outraged tribes careening wildly from one controversy to the next, this perfectly inoffensive message has somehow been rendered bad by Team Red. And here's the first lie, actually the first set of lies. Lie number one. Gillette ad tells men not to hurt people. No, it doesn't. It tells men that they're the only ones responsible for all or most bullying against women, when the exact opposite is true. It tells men that they owe women protection, which is a controversial political opinion and very, very far away from truth or universally accepted norm. And it insinuates that white men are uniquely dangerous, when as a matter of fact that's as far away from reality as it can possibly get. Lie number two. This is a perfectly inoffensive message. No, it isn't. And everyone with an IQ higher than 90 knows this. So either Robbie is being deliberately obtuse, or he's just really not smart enough. I'm not ruling out any of these two possibilities, quite frankly. And finally, lie number three, that this has, quote, somehow been rendered bad by Team Red, unquote. This lie has also been perpetrated by The Guardian, whose initial headline claimed that the ad is being attacked by men's rights activists. But on The Guardian, a smarter propagandist realized that it's not a particularly good thing to call millions of people MRAs, because they might look up the term and realize that MRAs are mostly correct on most issues. So from a propaganda perspective, if you're on the far left, like Robbie and The Guardian are, you don't want to associate popular disagreements with what you want to silence. So just one paragraph in, and Robbie has lied to us tremendously, and then there's more. Quote, the Gillette commercial is the product of mainstream radicalized feminism and emblematic of cultural Marxism, wrote Turning Point USA's Candace Owen, her name is Owens, by the way. A conservative pundit, right-leaning author Michael Knowles accused Gillette of granting the premises of SJW Jackals, and over at National Review, Ben Shapiro claimed that the company was kowtowing to leftist social priorities in order to inoculate itself from the woke scolds of the left. If that was the goal, the ad will certainly fail. Woke scolding is a condition for which there is no reliable vaccine. These strong claims, cultural Marxism, SJW Jackals, leftist social priorities, should strike anyone who actually watched the ad as fairly ridiculous. Here it is. Well, Robbie, as it turns out, the vast majority of the people who actually watched the ad agreed, at least in part, that this was indeed a far-left lecture and not a perfectly inoffensive message. So, as you dishonestly described it. Sorry. Quote, yes, the ad invokes toxic masculinity, an ill-defined concept sometimes deployed by the campus left in overbroad ways. And here's Robbie trying to play centrist by pretending he understands the issue, but it's misapplied or something. Look up for his articles on the campus left. In almost all of them, he goes over the top to grant anything to the far left and as little as possible to normal people. Anyway, back to the article. But most of the ad depicts men deciding not to bully each other, harass women, or commit violence. Are these really leftist social priorities? Do conservatives really want to portray them as such? And here's Robbie playing concern troll. You see, he's not really agreeing with the extremist, misandrist message in the Gillette ad. He's just actually concerned with the optics, you know? What if people think that anti-bullying is a leftist social priority? Well, so what if they end up believing that, Rob? Anti-bullying is, in fact, a very bad thing. Anti-bullying has done a tremendous amount of harm, and I have yet to see any solid evidence of anything good to have come out from any anti-bullying campaign or policy, especially after the moment bullying was redefined to mean essentially anything that anyone anywhere might find mildly inconvenient. Let's not forget, bullying means telling journalists learn to code. So yeah, anti-bullying, as it is understood today, is a distinctly leftist social priority, and that is a bad thing precisely because anti-bullying should, as it is understood today, should cease to exist, and most definitely should be helicoptered away from schools, and companies who support this should be bankrupted via the market. But then Rob goes full far left and essentially contradicts the previous paragraph where he tried to portray himself as a moderate. Quote, Shapiro's catchphrase is "facts don't care about your feelings," which he deploys, often correctly, to chide the left for having rendered unsayable something that is true. There are generally some differences between men and women, for instance, but this seems to be a case where the right's feelings are getting in the way of facts. Men commit a lot more violence than women, sexual harassment is undeniably a problem in many workplaces, and boys should be raised not to attack each other, close quote. Oh really? And what else should we do, Mr. Kak? First of all, sexual harassment is not undeniably a problem in many workplaces. What is understood today as sexual harassment is, for the most part, not a problem in any objective sense. Yes, men and women look at each other, which is sexual harassment these days. That's very common, but not a problem unless you are a far-left misandrist ideologue. Also, I like how Robbie uses vague words like many or a lot more, but then expects us to believe he's not an SJW. How many workplaces? 100 is many, but so is 100,000. He says, men commit a lot more violence than women. Really? Given how loose the definition of the word violence has gotten today, I am not sure that's true at all. Also, what does a lot more mean? For instance, the majority of human trafficking, including sex slavery, is committed by women. The vast majority of it, to be more precise. Does that count as violence? Almost all killings of children are committed by women. I would argue that killing children should count as violence. Those two facts are enough for me to say that women commit a lot more violence against children than men. If we use the leftist definition of violence to include bullying, of which the majority is perpetrated by women, by the way, especially bullying against other women, then Robbie's take becomes entirely false. As for boys should be raised not to attack each other, yeah, no. First of all, good luck with that. You know, just like little girls bully each other in ways so vicious that are hardly imaginable for most boys, boys attack each other in ways that adults far too often misjudge. The old adage that men curse at each other but don't mean it, while women compliment each other but don't mean it, is pretty damn true. Quote, here's Robbie playing dumb again. It's true that not all men engage in violence, sexual harassment and bullying, and on the flip side, plenty of women are abusers. Collectivist assumptions are obnoxious and anathema to libertarian principles, whether they are deployed against men, women, white people, black people, etc. Certainly some on the left are guilty of going this route, as are many who claim to speak for the right. But the ad never said that all men are bad. It never argued that toxic masculinity is always and everywhere a dangerous ideal. It made a very modest statement: treat people better in hopes of selling more razors to people who agree. Again, why is this bad? Oh, really? So collectivist assumptions are obnoxious, but for some reason they're okay to be made about men. Give me a freaking break, you loon. I'll start taking this kind of garbage seriously when I'll see some ads telling women to stop killing their children, stop dumping their children in the garbage disposals, and perhaps stop lying about rape. This is when I'll start taking Robbie's tripe seriously. And again, what I'm seeing here is shared by tens of millions of people who also saw the ad and deemed it as being pretty fucking bad. Also, Robbie seems to be missing the part where the ad also frowns upon men hitting at women. I guess to him, being a soy boy, that seems pretty perfectly normal and uncontroversial, but as it turns out, that was something that pissed off millions of both men and women. Who knew? Women like to be flirted with, and men like to flirt with women. I wonder if there's something biological there, that no matter how much political propaganda you pour, it just still doesn't change. Another angle that Robbie seems to be missing is that for a lot of people, both men and women, it is inherently insulting to tell them don't beat people up because it implies that they would otherwise do that. I mean, hey, how would Robbie feel if I were to publicly ask him when did he stop raping children? Or if I were to make an ad selling blank paper with the message that editors at Reason magazine should avoid raping children? I'm not so sure Robbie would bend over backwards to try to see my legitimate point, but would instead react as any normal human being reacts when delivered an unsolicited, insulting sermon. Also, let us not forget that men in general are incredibly tolerant. If men acted like women, the amount of abuse and insults hurled at men in advertising would generate 24/7 outrage. But it doesn't, because most men, most of the time, can't be bothered or even laugh along. Partly because men grow a thicker skin anyway, and self-deprecating humor is quite appreciated among men. So if this had really pissed off several tens of millions of men, this should give Robbie and all the rest of the far-left propagandists masquerading as journalists some pause for thought. But it doesn't, because they're really not that smart. Quote, young guys need to learn from men who treat women well and act as protectors rather than victimizers, which is exactly what the Gillette ad called on men to do. Well, no. First of all, Gillette did not just called on men to be good beta protectors. If it had done just that, it would have gone completely unnoticed. Secondly, it is a political opinion, and increasingly a controversial one, to say that young boys need to learn from men who treat women well and act as protectors. Because increasingly, young guys are correctly asking, now hold on a second, where's women's responsibility in this? Do all women inherently deserve my protection? Why? And how about no? And you can complain about that all you want, but the fact does remain. Women, as a general rule, in certain societies, in particularly the liberal lefty sectors, have been treating men terribly over the last 20 years. To think that will not have an impact is to live in the la-la land. And to think you can seriously come to Generation Z, the generation who grew up entirely under institutionalized misandry, and tell them that they should a priori treat all women well and protect them, to think that will work is, once again, the result of lunacy and utter obliviousness. To do that with extreme disdain and condescension, like Gillette did, there is no way normal people, including normal women, to interpret that as anything but disrespect. And finally, Robbie wraps it up by reasserting the initial lie. Quote, people are free to associate with whatever brand they want, so if Gillette's so-called virtue signaling bothers someone that much, that person may go ahead and buy razors elsewhere. But it would be a shame if the right started boycotting companies for taking the position that maybe hurting people is bad. Is owning the libs really that important? Well, yes, Robbie, owning the libs for their disdainful, extremist nonsense is really that important. Alright, I think I can squeeze one more piece in this episode, and then hopefully the rest will fit into the next one. I really don't want to tape 5 periodic insanities in a row. Anyway, via the BBC, hang white people. Rapper Nick Conrad faces fine for YouTube song. Prosecutors are calling for a suspended €5,000 fine for French rapper Nick Conrad, who is on trial for incitement to murder in Paris after he published an online video entitled Hang White People. The music video shows the rapper acting out the kidnap, torture and hanging of a white man. The lyrics, which sparked outrage, call for white babies to be killed. Mr. Conrad denies the charge and says the song is a comment on racism. Well, he's clearly not lying on that. It is a comment on racism. his racism, to be more precise. The 9-minute video, first published on YouTube in September, was quickly suspended for violating the company's terms of service. It depicts a white man being shot and tortured by the rapper and an accomplice. He is forced to bite the pavement and is kicked in the head before being hanged. One section of the lyrics reads, "I go to the nurseries, I kill the white babies, catch them quick and hang their parents." Anti-racism groups have called the clip an incitement to violence and racial hatred. The 35-year-old French rapper of Cameroonian descent was virtually unknown to the French public before he released his video 4 months ago. He was raised in the suburbs of Paris and worked as a receptionist at a 5-star hotel on Avenue de l'Opéra until he lost his job recently. Nick Conrad is a pseudonym. The charge against Mr. Conrad could result up to 5 years in jail and 45,000 euros in fines. Prosecutors have requested a suspended fine of 5,000 euros, saying that he has already, to a certain extent, paid the consequences. The rapper told the court on Wednesday that the video was obviously a fictional depiction of racism designed to shock by inverting roles and therefore not to be taken at face value. The scenes are said to be a reference to the film American History X, where white neo-Nazis subjected a black man to similar violent acts. The BBC's Hugh Schofield reports that the prosecution countered this, saying there cannot be exceptions. Incitement to violence does not stop just because the intended victim is white. The trial continues on March 19. I'm so loving this when leftist rules are being used against leftist racists. But on a more serious note, left-wing racists in America should take note of this case and start doing their part in defending the First Amendment at all costs. Why? Because absolute free speech doesn't just mean that your opposition can say mean things about you. It also means you can say whatever you want. Ultimately, this is a case of insanity across the board. Mr. Conrad is, without a doubt, a deeply troubled man, but the prosecution is at least equally insane. Because Mr. Conrad, as insane and bigoted as he certainly is, should still retain the right to artistic freedom. I mean, what's next? Banning films? Because the French cinematography contains quite a lot of incitements to both religious and racial hatred, across the board. I mean, in art, such things are often good tools for making a point. It may be an insane point, like it appears to be in Mr. Conrad's case, but that's the purpose of art. And again, I am generally, with some exceptions though, of the opinion that rap is crap. Again, some notable exceptions do exist, but in the case of French rap, I think it's almost universally crap. So I don't exactly care whether this punk gets convicted or not. But purely on principle, he should be left alone, just like everyone else should be left alone. The idea that the obscure video of an obscure rapper is incitement to racial hatred and incitement to murder runs contrary even to the French tradition, a country which used to pride itself for its very high degree of artistic freedom, oftentimes standing alone in Europe as a bastion for artists. So as a civilizational cost, it is worse to find this little racist cunt than to just leave him alone and let the market deal with him, which for the most part already did anyway. Also, if you're gonna start prosecuting rappers for incitement to racial hatred for the violence in their music videos, you're gonna have to create a separate court and a separate prosecutorial office just for this category. Because the vast majority of rap music videos contain quite a lot of violence in them. It's part and parcel of the genre. You don't have to like it and you don't have to buy it, but huge fines and jail time? No, I'm sorry, but that's insane. It just really is. Alrighty, I think that's enough for now. I'll get some more liquid and start taping the 4th episode in a row, episode 28. Stay tuned. More of this is coming. I'm basically spending the entire day recording videos. So please, give shekelim. Making these videos is really not easy. Thanks a lot for watching. Do visit the website. I'll see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.